Hello and welcome to FP Live. I'm Ravi Agrawal, Foreign Policy's Editor-in-Chief. I've just gotten back from the Munich Security Conference, an annual meeting of spy chiefs, foreign and defense ministers, and world leaders. And this past weekend, for the European leaders there, it really seemed like their relationship with the United States had reached a tipping point. Now, it was already strained, to be sure. And that's in part because US President Donald Trump had a call last week with Russia's Vladimir Putin, ostensibly about Ukraine, but without consulting Europe. That sparked all kinds of fears in European capitals. Then came Munich, and then came Vice President J.D. Vance. In a much anticipated speech, he told leaders there the biggest threat to their continent was not China, not Russia, but something within. And that something within was a lack of free speech and real democracy, he said. Now, European leaders immediately found this strange, especially because of January 6, 2021. Vance then went on to meet a leader from the far-right Alternative for Germany party, the AfD, and that generated a fierce response from German leaders because, of course, the AfD has openly flirted with Nazism. Something seemed to visibly break in the transatlantic relationship. Several leaders, off the record, told me they felt it was time for Europe to think about going it alone, to truly fend for itself. And that's why some of them met again in Paris this week. Now, amid all of this, and the reason why I give you all of this context, I got a chance to sit down with the president of Finland, Alexander Stubb. Finland is a fascinating player in this drama because it has for decades been studiously neutral and only joined NATO after Russia invaded Ukraine. When it did, it instantly doubled the length of NATO's borders with Russia. So how is Finland thinking about the future of Ukraine? How is it reacting to all of the tensions breaking out between Brussels and Washington? I put those and lots of other questions to President Stubb. Remember, if you want to know more about what happened in Munich, we have a special insider call with me and two reporters on Wednesday. You can watch it right here on this site. If you're not an insider yet, sign up. Okay, let's dive into that interview. President Stubb, great to see you in Munich. Welcome to FB Live.
Thanks.
So let me start by asking you this. How worried are you about the fact that Presidents Trump and Putin had a phone call and nobody knows what they talked about?
Well, I'm worried, but not alarmed. I think this is a beginning of a dialogue and we're far away. The way in which I see it personally is that you cannot have peace or a ceasefire without Ukraine. You can't have it without Europe. And it's good that President Trump is engaging with Putin, but I think the centerpiece should be President Zelensky.
And you say you're not too worried, but what if they've made decisions that exclude European leaders or exclude Ukraine? What can Europe do about that?
Well, to be frank, they can't make those decisions. The way in which I see it is Europe needs to have more skin in the game, which basically means they can't only be saying that we need to be around the table, they need to have a proposal. I think the proposal is very simple and it goes in three phases. Number one is you prepare the negotiations or discussions. And that means that you basically put maximum pressure on Putin and on Russia. More sanction, using frozen assets, and then giving more military aid to Ukraine. Number two is the actual ceasefire. The ceasefire is, in my mind, quite simple. You have a demarcation of a line, then you have to have monitors taking care of it. And then after that, you start looking at what the possible peace agenda actually could be. And then only do you begin the peace negotiations after the ceasefire is in place. Of course, you need confidence building measures and other things in between. But the bottom line is that there's no way that you can decide European security over the heads of Europeans.
How are you feeling about the Trump administration's views on resolving this conflict? It seems to me that there's been a bit of a shift. 3 or 4 months ago, before President Trump won the election, we had a certain set of expectations. Then in the handover period, there were very positive signals coming from the administration about not wanting to lose in Ukraine, not wanting another Afghanistan. But in the last week or so, we're seeing different sounds, with the call between Trump and Putin, but then also Defense Secretary Hegseth saying that, NATO is not really a likely outcome for Ukraine, or that the borders before 2014 is also not a realistic scenario for Ukraine. How do you respond to all of that when you hear it?
Well, it's a bit of a back and forth strategy, a seesaw strategy in many ways. So,
The American
one day,
strategy.
the American strategy. So one day, Hegseth says, no NATO membership, current borders, and no American backing. The next day, Vice President J.D. Vance gives an excellent interview in the Wall Street Journal, basically putting a lot of pressure on Russia. So it goes a little bit back and forth. And I think we're all sort of struggling to find a way in which we deal with this piece in a broader perspective. I do think that the window of opportunity for a ceasefire, and I stress ceasefire, is 3 to 6 months, and that's welcome. But actually, the peace negotiations are going to take much, much longer, and they are going to have to involve a broader range of players. Of course, Ukraine, Russia, the US, and then Europe in one way or another.
What I'm hearing from you there is, amid the seesawing, there's a through line that you're able to detect. I mean, you have many conversations with other American officials, many of whom are here in Munich. What are those like, and how different do they tend to be from what we hear in the news?
Well, I just had a meeting with 20 senators from foreign affairs, defense, and the rest of it. And I think the message there was very clear. I mean, the backup for Ukraine is extremely strong, and we need to keep that momentum going. We have to understand that peace negotiations are always a long process. I myself mediated one ceasefire in 5 days, which was in the war in Georgia when I was Finnish foreign minister and chairman of the OSCE. That was much easier. Here, the stakes are much bigger. And we have to understand that this is not only about Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity, but this is also about a European security structure and actually the world order. So the choice is between Yalta, which was a carve-up of big states, and I don't hope this is not going to be a carve-up with Russia, the US, and China, or Helsinki Accords from 1975, which set up clear rules of what statehood actually means. And I think one of the key principles here is that we should absolutely not take NATO membership for Ukraine off the table, because the truth is that a sovereign state can decide for which membership it applies, and then it's up for the organization itself to decide whether it's okay or not. So I think the EU membership of Ukraine is a given, and then NATO membership in the long run.
Speaking of NATO, there's so much pressure now from this new administration on upping defense spending as a percentage of GDP. Finland, for example, is something like 2.4%, I believe, of GDP. How on earth do you get to 5%?
Well, first of all, you don't fight wars with percentages. You actually fight them with military equipment and capabilities. Finland is a country which has obligatory military service. We have 900,000 men and women that have done it, including myself, and my son just finished his. We have 280,000 men and women that we can take from the reserve at wartime. We have 62 F-18s. We just bought 64 F-35s. We have long-range missiles, air, land, and sea. We have the biggest artillery in Europe together with Poland. So we don't have a percentage. We have stuff. I add on to top of that, we have actually 2.4, 2.5% right now. But if you take obligatory military service, suddenly you're up to 3%. It's not the percentage that matters, it's the substance that matters. And I'm sure that we'll get there. But the truth is, Donald Trump has been right from the beginning, from the get-go, that Europe needs to take more care of its own security and increase its defense expenditure. And remember, in 2014, there were only 3 countries in NATO with 2%. Now there are 23, and that's going on the up. So I think Donald Trump should be given credit for this.
But that comes at a cost, right? So I think the other side of it is you see the rise of the right across Europe now. There will be pressures. So as you up defense spending, you will have to reduce spending in other areas. What are those areas?
Well, it's not a zero-sum game. I think what a lot of European leaders are doing right now is to look for creative ways in which to finance defense. One simple thing is actually to coordinate your orders instead of, having 27 different orders. A second conversation that's being held is defense bonds. Basically, you have mutual debt on defense things. The third one is to allow the European Investment Bank to lend money also for the defense industry. The fourth thing is that you actually hike up European defense expenditure in the EU in the next multi-financial framework. So there are a lot of different things that we can do there. And I think that Europeans understand that it's not only the pressure coming from the US, it's not only domestic pressure, but you don't have welfare without security, and you don't have security without a strong defense.